Right. This is Hashem. Hi, Lois Sheldon. Hello, Lewis. We have big.
Hi. We have a little news here.
Okay.
A little baby granddaughter within the past hour, and
Wow.
Mazel tov.
and the Alta Zaida who's listening on his phone line here, gets a big mazel tov.
Mazel
tov.
And mazel tov.
Wow.
Zaida, mazel tov.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you.
That's all right. Good. They should. Okay.
Amen.
Oh, my.
Okay, here we go. So today's daf is daf nun hey. So very simple, straightforward daf. Again, we're dealing with languages. Like sometimes you'll say something, and you mean something more than that. When I first started working, they would in Wall Street, the boss would say, "Okay, we got to make some hay." So hay doesn't mean hay. Hey, it means we got to make some money. It means other things. So you'll see over here, that's what we're discussing over here. Certain words have other meanings to it. So the Mishnah begins, Hanoidim min hadogin, someone who makes a neder from not to eat dagan. Dagan is wheat, right? Generally, grains. So there are five wheats, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. So says the Mishnah, not only you're also on grains, but you're also bapul hamitzri. He holds the dry cowpea, the Egyptian beans, is also asr. Now it doesn't, because grains doesn't mean just wheat. According to Rabbi, people refer to as the processing of beans is very similar to the processing of wheat, where you have like a shell, a shaft, a berry inside. So the processing of wheat means is similar to grains. So when you make a neder, you're not eating dagan, you mean also pul hamitzri. Divrei Meir. But Chachamim disagree. Eina asa ela b'chameshes haminim. You're only asa on the five species of grain: wheat, oat, barley, spelt, and rye. So those are the five, but that's it. It doesn't include anything else. This word dagan doesn't mean anything else. Rab Meir says, Hanoider min ha-tavua. So instead of saying dagan, you said tavua. Tavua is produce that makes money. But generally, in the vernacular of Hebrew, tavua definitely refers to the five grains. So even Rab Meir would agree, Eina asa ela b'chameshes haminim. You only asa from the five types of grain. That's it. Avo, but hanoider min ha-dagan. But Rameir reiterates his position. If you make a neder from dagan, asur bakoil, you're asur on everything, not just wheat, but beans and anything that looks like has a similar process to make it as wheat does, where you have to clear a shaft to get to a seed or berry. So that's what you mean when you say, I'm not going to eat dagan. But you'll be permitted to eat the peres ilan, fruits, uviyarik, vegetables, because vegetables and fruits do not look like beans and do not look like grains. So therefore, you're permitted to eat that. So the Gemara understands that Rameir's position is, remember, do you want to understand Rameir's position? Is the dagan called the miggan mashma? Dagan means anything that you pile up as a grain. As a grain, like, you make a hofen, like a pile of grain. That's what grain is. So therefore, it includes beans, right? That's what Meir says. So Mosiv, Rav Yosef asked a question against Rav Meir. There's a pasuk that says, and this pasuk is speaking in the vernacular of how you would normally speak. So it's like the way you like conversational Hebrew, because this is in Divrei Yamim. It's not like a Navi talking. The Torah, the Tanakh describes when Chizkiyahu encouraged people to get more religious because they weren't so religious in his time. So the Tanakh describes that they became very religious and started to give off meiser. When it got publicized, here b'Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people increase giving their meiser, the 10% to the Levi or Ani. They gave dagan of wheat, Tirish wine, biyitzar, and oil, the chol tfuas sada, and anything produce of the field, l'raif. So this pasuk seems to say not like Rameir, because the fact is it says the word dogon, and dogon was not the all-inclusive word that Rameir said. Rameir said dogon is an all-inclusive word, and yet that pasuk says that no, it doesn't include tvua sada, any other produce of the field, because that's singled out in the pasuk. So this pasuk, and which is speaking in the vernacular of normal Hebrew, is difficult against Rab Meir's position. That's what the Gemara's question is. If you understand, like Rab Meir, that dogon means anything that you pile up and process it like wheat, but it includes everything. My kiparetz hadavar hirbu. Why does it say tvuas asad in that pasuk? That another thing that they brought. So the Gemara understood that tvuas asad in the pasuk means beans. So beans is not included in the word dogon. So the Gemara says no. Abai says explain. Tvuas asada is latuye peres ilim v'yarak. That means that they started giving meiser from fruits of the tree and vegetables. That even Rameir agrees that in dogon is not totally inclusive of fruits and vegetables. It doesn't include fruits and vegetables. It includes beans and rice or whatever you pile up, but it doesn't include vegetables. And that's what tvuas asada adds on to. So that explains Rameir's position. Then Rameir, the Mishnah continued, Rameir said, Hanoider min hatvua. Somebody who makes a neder, he's not eating tvua. So tvua in Hebrew is only the 5 grains. Like whatever you make a mazoinus on, or hamotzi, that's what you mean, nothing else. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Hakol moidim benoider min hatvua, she'ina asa ela machamesh seminim. Everybody would agree, and that seems to be straight out in the Mishnah. That if you make a neder, you're not going to eat tvua, you're only also from the 5 types of grain. Tanya nami again, wheat, oats, spelt, rye, and barley. Tanya nami hachi, the Brisa says, Shavin, both Rameir and Chachamim are equal. They both agree. Benoider min hatvua, if you make a neder, you're not eating tvua. Shein asa ela mehecha minim. You're only asa on the 5 minim. So the Gemara asks, Pshita, isn't that obvious? You see that in the Mishnah. And the Gemara understands that the word tvua, everybody says tvua in the Chumash or whatever. When you talk, you mean green type of foods. So what's the chiddush? What is Rabbi Yochanan teaching you? So the Gemara says, no, Mahu the same, this is what I would have thought. Tvua, when you make a neder, you're not going to eat tvua. Kol mili mashma, it means everything. Kamash, it means everything. It can mean all types of food are called tvua. Like I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes people will say, let's go make hay. That means let's go make money, or let's do something profitable. Or let me eat my grits or grib, something like that. But it doesn't mean you're eating grains. You're eating, could be eating steak. So I would think that tvua is an all-inclusive word to mean everything. Kamash malan. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan teaches you, that tvua doesn't mean everything. But like mashme kol mili, it doesn't mean everything. It just means grains. So tvua means grains. So Maser Rav Yosef said, asked the question, if tvua means grains, right? Here in this pasuk it says dogon, grains, and tvua, grains. If you tell me the word tvua means grain and dogon means grain, then the pasuk is redundant. It's repeating itself. So how do you answer that question? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rabba, Rabba said, tvua lechud, tvua sada lechud. You're right. The word tvua by itself means grains. When you say tvua sada, when you say the field's tvua, it means anything produced by a field, which includes fruits and vegetables. So that's why that pasuk is not redundant. Tvua sada means fruits and vegetables. And it's different than the word tvua. Tvua, the word alone, means grains. Now the Gemara tells us a story. Baal Mar Shmuel, the son of Master Shmuel, apparently, I think he's very wealthy, and he doesn't want to give all his money to his kids, so he wants to give a gift when he passes on to Rava. So Pakid, he gave a command, and I guess in his will, the Litnin Plesa Alfi Zuze, they should give 13,000 Zuzi coins, or let's call dollars, 13,000 Zuzi Rava to Rava. And where's the source income of those 13,000 zuzim? Is min alalta, from alalta, which is another word for tvua. Alalta is the Aramaic translation of the word tvua. So remember that word. Alalta is tvua, and he said the Nahar Panya, from the produce that's where I have fields in Nahar Panya. So it seems that if you just look at the word alalta, you would think that the gift to Rava was 13,000 value, the 13,000 zuzim of value of grain produce that he had in Nahar Panya, because alalta is another word for tvua. So Rava had a question. Shalcha Rava l'kamed Rav Yosef. Rava sent the question to Rav Yosef, alalta heichem ikaria. How do you read the word alalta? What does it mean, alalta? Does it mean just grains? Rav Yosef says, yes, it means only grains. Masnisanhi, that's our Mishnah. V'shavim b'noidim in tvua. If you make a neder and your neder said the word tvua, shein also elam chameshes minim. You're only also on the 5 types of grain. So if alalta is another translation of the word tvua, that means that what he meant to give you is 13,000 value of his tvua that he has. Amalei Abayah disagreed with Rav Yosef. Midami. He said, you're right. Tvua, the Hebrew word tvua, loy mashmel chameshes haminim. That means the 5 types of grain. I grant you that. Alalta, which is the Aramaic translation of tvua, kol mili mashma, means everything. You see, even you can't make an Hebrew is very hard to translate. That's why they're always reluctant to translate the Chumash, the Tanakh, and everything, because even if you're translating in another language, the name sometimes means other things. And that's example over here. Tvua in Aramaic is translated as alalta, but the word alalta can mean anything. Kamili mashma, it means any type of beans, grains. It doesn't mean anything. So since Bar Mar Shmuel wrote his will in Aramaic, when he wrote alalta, he means he could take 13,000 value of any type of grains or legumes or beans that he has in Nahar Panya. He doesn't have to limit it to the 5 grains, to the produce of the 5 grains. So that's what Abaya wanted to tell to Rav Yosef, or tell it to Rava, that you can take more than the 5 grains. This got back to Rava. Rava said, I know that. I never had that question. I knew alalta means anything. I can take from anything. The alalta kol mili masha means any type of produce that's similar to grains, but not necessarily only grains. But hadu the baili. But this was my real question. Can I take the rental income of his homes or ships? Was that included as part of the will, where I can draw from that 13,000 zuzim income I'm supposed to get? Can I partake in that? Mi amrinam, do you say kiven the pochasen lav alalti? Since the houses, when you rent a home and when you rent a ship, it's called depreciation. So that's not considered alalta, because alalta means something that's just pure profit. Alalta means pure profit. But when you're renting, so when you sell, let's say, fruits, vegetables, or grains or beans, so when you sell that, it's pure profit. But when you rent out a house, it's not pure profit, because there's depreciation and expenses. So therefore, that's not included in the word alalta. Or dilma, maybe, when you rent out a house, you don't really know what the depreciation is, because it's hard to determine a daily or yearly depreciation. Over time you can tell, but not in a limited amount of time. Alaltahi, that's considered pure profit, and that's included in the part of what I'm supposed to be getting from the will. So Rav Yosef totally got it wrong. Rav Yosef said alalta only means 5 types of grain, and Abaya and Rava said no, it means anything, except we don't know, does it include rental income from ships and from homes. So Amrua Marbanan Kamed Rav Yosef. They told over Rava's opinion to Rav Yosef. Even though Rava sent Rav Yosef the question, Rav Yosef totally got it wrong. Rav Yosef said out loud, since he doesn't need me, he knows how to answer his own questions, Rava. Amai Shalach Lan. Why is he asking me questions? Rava, you know the answer to your own questions. So why are you sending me a shaila that you're answering yourself? Ikbed Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was hurt by what Rava did. Shama Rava heard that Rav Yosef was hurt by what Rava did, asking him a question, and Rava even knew the answer better than Rav Yosef. So V'asa Lakame B'malad Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara, Rava visited Rav Yosef on Erev Yom Kippur. Now Rav Yosef is Sagi Nohar. He can't see. He's blind. So Ashkechei L'Shamei. So Rava found at that time on Erev Yom Kippur have a kamozik kamei kasa dechamra, that they were pouring for Rav Yosef a cup of wine, I guess to relax his nerves for the big day Erev Yom Kippur, and you're supposed to eat Erev Yom Kippur. So Amar Lei, so Rava, who wants to ask Mechila and make up with Rav Yosef, he says to the attendant, Havli, give it to me, the imzeg lei ana. I want to do the diluting of the wine. I know how to dilute wine. Give it to me, and I'm going to serve Rav Yosef. Yahav lei. So this attendant allowed Rava to do that. And he was diluting the wine for Rav Yosef. Tika Shasi, when Rav Yosef was drinking, Omar, he said, this sounds like, this wine that I'm drinking sounds like it was diluted by Rava Durei Rav Yosef Bachama. Apparently, Rava had a certain method of diluting wine, and because Rav Yosef was blind, he had a heightened sense of sensation, so he was able to taste who mixed wine for him. Amalei, so the attendant said, Hunihu, you're right. He's right over here. Rava did it, and he's standing right here. Amalei, so Rav Yosef said to Rava, Loi Tesev, don't sit down. Akarach, stand on your feet. Ada Amrit Le Perusha Don Milsa. I want you to explain me the following pasuk. So this pasuk is the lessons of the following pasuk was to teach you that when it comes to Torah, you have to be humble. So he says like this, My Diksiv, what is the pasuk? Rav Yosef's question to ask Rava to explain it. Why does it say the pasuk, Mi Midbar Matana? They went from Midbar to Matana, Umatana, Nachaliel, Machniel, Bomas. These are places of the traveling, where the Jews traveled in the desert. But touch it up like a Hasidic type, that it's a hint to something that you should remember. Some of the lessons in life you could learn from the Torah, but it's not the literal meaning of what the pasuk is saying, but it's a way to remember what certain ethical lessons that you're supposed to learn. Amalei, so Rava said that I'm going to tell you the pshat in the pasuk. If a person makes himself like a desert, he's free to anybody. In other words, if a person knows how to learn and he's not snobbish about who his study partner is. He's ready to study with anybody who wants to learn with him. So then, you think you're losing out because you're learning with somebody who's weaker than you. The opposite happens. Torah nitna loy b'matana. Torah is given over as a gift. Shenemar b'midbar matana. If you make yourself like a desert, matana, you get a gift. God gives you, like in your brain, plants you such knowledge that you're able to understand Torah better. It's a good idea to always have a study partner that's less than you. And you see that automatically, even though you feel you have to prepare and you're not gaining from the other partner, but somehow God is your teacher and he'll give you the Torah as a gift. The Keven Shenit Niloy B'matana. As soon as you get this gift from a God, Nochali El, God helps you become inherit it. In other words, that you retain it. Shenema Matana Nachaliel. From the gift, Nachaliel, you inherit it, and it becomes like you retain it. Since you got this inheritance from God, you start going, people start respecting you. Shinema u'menachliel bamas. You go from nachliel bamas to heightened place. But again, if you become a balgaiver, then you go circle again. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashpilai. God will humble you, and that's always when you start being haughty. God humbles you. Shinema min boros hagai. From the heights, you go to the valley. Not only that, when God humbles you, you sink very deep into the ground. Shenema v'nishkafai apnei yeshuma. You really sink. It's a pasuk that says it further. You be like the doorstep. So nishkaf is like a doorstep. Anyway, The Torah teaches you that in the Chazal it says a person ma'od ma'od have a shval ruach. You have to be very exceedingly humble with low expectations on life in order for you to grow in your spirituality. So if a person he makes tshuva and he humbles himself, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu Magbiyah, then somehow HaKadosh Baruch Hu raises you. Shenema, Kolgei, say anybody, we go to Amid Beis. Whoever is low will be lifted up. So that's the story of life. You get some gifts that you didn't work so hard for. You become haughty. God life humbles you again. Then you get older and you start regretting being so haughty, and then God lifts you up again. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, which finish up. Hanoidim and adogim, somebody who makes a neder not to eat wheat. Also, after the pool hamitzri yavesh balach. He's also the pool hamutzri, the Egyptian bean, only when it's dry, where it looks and it's processed like grains. But the wet ones you're permitted. Umutter and you mutter in rice, so dagan is not considered rice. Bechilka betarges ubetisne, and cut grains. If you cut the berry in half, or in quarters, or in thirds, so it's crushed grains because you use it to make porridge or something like that. So that's not included in dagan. Dagan means whole grains or whole legumes or whole pul mitzri. Next, hanoidim min aperes hashana. Look at this word. You make a neder, I'm not eating fruits the entire year. Also b'chol peres hashana. You also in every type of fruit. Or mutter, but you're permitted to have bigdoyim, goats, tloyim, sheep, chol of milk, baits and eggs, gaizos, chickens. So that's not fruits. Fruits is something that grows from the ground. But if you said gidule shana alai, gidule means something that grows, not fruits from the ground, but grows from the ground, well, and gets its nourishment from the ground. Gedule means it gets its nourishment from the ground. Also, then you also even in any type of even animals, because animals get their nourishment from the ground. If you said gedule, anything that gets its nourishment from the ground, that and you make a neder on that, you're also in that. Let's say you make a neder, I'm not eating fruits of the earth. Also b'chol peres aretz, then you also to eat any fruits of the earth. But umuter bechamein upitrius, truffles or mushrooms, which are not fruits from the earth, you're permitted. But if you said gidule karka olai, something that grows from the ground. So instead of saying fruits from the ground, you say it grows on the ground. Well, also b'kulam. Then you also even in mushrooms, because mushrooms grow on the ground, but it's not a fruit of the ground; it grows on the ground. So the Gemara asks a question. Runinu, I will ask you a contradiction, and the Gemara basically is going to say that mushrooms are as a type of produce that yes, it grows on the ground, but its nourishment is from the atmosphere, from the earth, from the air. So Raminu, let me ask you a stira. Al davar she'en gedulim in aretz. It's hilchas brachas. If something that doesn't grow from the ground, only you have to say shahakol niyabedvari. That's your bracha. B'tanya, we learned in a brisa. Alamelech, let's say you're eating salt. Val zomis, val kamein, val pitrius. I don't know what zomis is, but kamein and pitrius, truffles and mushrooms. Oime shahakol niyabedvari. You make shahakol niyabedvari. And so, but what is shahakol? Something that doesn't gedule mid'aretz, doesn't grow from the ground. So gedule does not include mushrooms. So how could you say when you make a neder and you say the word gedule, it does include mushroom? Asa b'kulam. Answers the Gemara, Amar Abaya, you're right. Mir beravu ma'ara, it grows from the ground. It grows on the ground, but its nourishment is ma'avira yanki v'loy ma'ara. It gets its nourishment from the air, but not from the ground. Okay, that explains why the neder would take effect if you say gedule, something that grows on earth, ya'asar and mushrooms. But doesn't the Mishnah say al dava she'ein gedule min aretz, if it doesn't grow from the ground? So, and the Mishnah says that mushrooms you make a shahakol, but mushrooms grow from the ground. So why do you make a shahakol? Answers the Gemara, no. What the Mishnah means, Tani, al dava she'ein yoinim min aretz, of something that doesn't get its nourishment from the ground, even if it grows from the ground, but it doesn't get its nourishment from the earth. So then you make a shahakol. And that is the story of mushrooms. It grows on a tree or on the ground, but its nourishment is from the air. So therefore, you make a shahakol on that. But if you said gedule, you make a neder, gedule, something that grows on the ground, that includes mushrooms, and you will not be permitted to eat mushrooms. Now the Mishnah continues. Mishnah says, you make a neder, I'm not wearing clothing. Mutter besak, you mutter to put on a sack, beria, or a bed sheet. Uvachamila is like a coarse curtain. Like these are not clothing. You're just wrapping yourself in a curtain. Amar, I guess also maybe a towel, because you only said ksus, only an item of clothing. But oimer kain and samar oilolai, if you say comb fleece, like wool fleece, just the wool itself is usher to me. Mutter leskasis, you're allowed to put on a wool suit. You just meant that you're not going to put you're mutter to, if you said koin and semer alai, you're allowed to cover yourself with wool fleece, because you meant semer means a wool suit. You didn't mean that you can't put a piece of wool on you. Hapishtin oila alai, if you say, I'm not going to wear flax clothing, that's probably what you meant. So mutter liskasis banitze pishon, then you're allowed to cover yourself with uncombed flax bundles, because that's not an item of clothing, and therefore when you said hapishtan, I'm not putting on flax, you meant clothing made out of linen or flax, but not just the uncombed flax to put on you. Rabbi Yehuda says hakoil lefi hanoider. You have to look at the situation when the person made the neder. Ta'in v'yizia. Let's say he's just carrying, let's say, wool, and he got sweating. And kasha, and the smell was very smelled, right? And Omar, he said, I'm never putting on wool or linen on me. So from the fact that he's carrying it, probably it wasn't clothing that he was carrying. He was carrying unfinished wool and unproduced linen. So therefore, they have a smell to it. So what he meant he's not going to, schlep this thing. So therefore, muttalis kasis, he's allowed to wear a wool suit or a linen jacket, but also lahafshal lacharis, he can't sling it behind him, because you look at the situation. What forced him to make the neder is because he was carrying unfinished wool and unfinished linen, and that's why it's not he's permitted to wear a wool linen suit, but he's not allowed to carry plain wool or plain linen. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Let's just finish up. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Hold on. Tanya, hanoide min aksus. Somebody makes a neder from, he's not going to put on a ksus. Ksus is an item of clothing. Mutter besak or b'yiriya or v'chamila. He's permitted to put on a sackcloth. B'yiriya is a sheet. V'chamila is a coarse item of clothing. Like what do we say? It's a coarse curtain. That's what it is. Something that's like a curtain. That's not a clothing. Ksus means clothing. But you also the punda. Punda is like a money belt. It's like an item of clothing. Ubapasya, or a sash, or skurtia. Skurtia, the Gemara is going to explain what that is in a moment. Or uveketavlia. You're not allowed to put on a leather spread. That's called a ketavlia. Vanpilia. Anpilia is like a leather sock. Uplinya, or to wear a leather apron. Umichnasayim is, I guess, a pants. I guess a leather or a pants. Vakova and hat, because all these things are items of clothing that are included in the word ksus. But a regular sack is not. If you say I'm not going to put on ksus, of course you're allowed to put a paper bag on you. That's not an item of clothing. The Gemara says, "My askurte." What is the meaning of this word askurte? That is the tanner's apron. A tanner's apron is also, even though only a tanner wears such a type of clothing, that's still included in the word kesus. Tanya, we learned it in Brisa. This Brisa talks about what are you allowed to wear on Shabbos. Now, if there is no Erev, they used to have a shaila in Borough Park. Can you wear the plastic covering the hat? Is that an item of clothing or not? Because Borough Park doesn't really have an Erev, but didn't have an Erev. So same thing over here. The Mishnah discusses things that may not be included in your neder, but they're considered an item of clothing. Yoitzin, a person allowed to go out on Shabbos where there is no Erev. Besak over, if there's a thick sack, or besagais over, or similar to a thick woolen item of clothing, but a woolen, let's say, it's a type of, it's more thicker than a sheet. Beria is a sheet, v'chamila, a coarse curtain, mipnei shaman. Again, you're allowed to wrap yourself in a towel and walk in the streets in Borough Park on Shabbos, even though there's no Erev. A towel is not an item of clothing, but still people use it as an item of clothing, even though it's not defined as an item of clothing. So it's not carrying. Avaloi beteva, you can't take a box, a milk crate, and put it over your head and walk out like that. Loi bekupa, another type of box, like mamachzelas, or a sitting mat, because of the rain. You can't put this thing on your top of your head. I don't think you're allowed to walk around with a barrel. You don't have clothing on, you're wearing a barrel. No one wears a barrel, so that's carrying on Shabbos. Harayim, shepherds, Yoisim Besakin, were permitted to go out with sackcloth. Not just a shepherd, but any person's allowed to walk around with a sackcloth, but most sackcloths were generally worn by shepherds. Rabbi Yehuda, so the Gemara just concludes, one more line. Tanya, we learned in Brisa. Kate said, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Hakoil Lefi HaNoider. What's the situation that Rabbi Yehuda discussed? That you have to look at the circumstance of the neder, of what caused the person to make neder, to determine what's usher in the neder. So Rabbi Yehuda gives you just plain examples. A guy was wearing wool. So I'll tell you that the wool is causing him discomfort. Maybe it's scratching him and making him feel uncomfortable. And he says, I'm never putting tzemer, should be on my neder. Wool should be on my neder. Also, lilbash, you're not allowed to put on a wool suit. But you're allowed to carry it. But hoya, ta'un pishtan. Let's say he was carrying flax, uncombed flax. And it started to smell, and he's carrying it. I don't know, maybe he's carrying it for work. And he said, I'm never carrying pishtan again. I hate pishtan, flax. You're allowed to put on a produced suit made out of linen. But also litan, you're not allowed to carry it, because you look at the situation of what caused him to make the neder to determine what he meant in the language of the neder. Okay.